all the video mugs of people pretty bored and waiting for other people to join and get started, right?
Yep.
I'm sorry, I got the same face, so.
Could have declared it, you know, a Halloween-themed tools call meeting, and everybody had to show up in costume, but we didn't.
We can try. Just send a warning, and please do it when I'm at home, not in a hotel, right? So that would be easier for me.
People are still joining at a fairly rapid rate, so we will wait a moment or two more before we get started. Hi, Mark.
Good to see you all.
All right, the join rate has slowed as other people join. We can help encourage them to share video. We like to have this particular meeting be as close to meeting around a table and having an interactive conversation as possible. Remember that the session is being recorded. It will appear on YouTube later. Temper your comments accordingly. We have the agenda in the form of the outline of the notes. If everybody is not looking at the notes page already, it is a good idea to have it available as we're going through the meeting, to be added as we're going along that are important. It's a meeting where you have to watch multiple windows. So we'll go ahead and get started. If anybody has any last minute agenda bashes, now would be a good time to raise them. All right. So Dave, please just go ahead and talk. This isn't a around the table thing. There aren't going to be so many people that we need to have a managed queue.
Okay, sure. I don't know if my mail got out, but in response to the agenda being posted on Tools Discuss, I'd asked if I could take a couple minutes and talk about the RST to XML conversion. And so happy to cover that under any other business or whatever, but that's why I'm here if there's time.
Yeah, let's squeeze that in at the end of the hot topics. So Liz, if you could make a section heading so that I remember to bring it up. All right, so since the last meeting, we've had quite a bit of work done on post-confirm. We abandoned the original plan to make a full Python 3 upgrade and change how it was glued to the mailman system in particular in favor of a quicker fix that left it in 2.7 and reduced the bounce rate quite significantly. I still haven't done a hard analysis, but my rough estimate is that we are getting less than 5% of the bounces that we were getting before the set of fixes that just went in. The big thing that we did that made some of the larger aggregated mail providers happier was to provide a real address at IETF.org on the message envelope. And there were also changes that did not make gratuitous line break changes to headers that were covered with signatures. So that improved the efficacy of what was going through. So I believe we're going to run with the system as is. John has a few more tweaks that he would like for us to consider, but he is still building the testing framework out for them to make sure that they're doing what he thinks that they're doing. And we will just run with this until we have the transition to the new IT infrastructure, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the call. When we do make that transition, post-confirm is going to need to be basically re-implemented rather than reused.
So, Robert, just for your information, in case you didn't notice, on the last ISG formal telechat, we fully supported the use of alternative algorithm or something at IETF.org for doing this, for to get a nice from envelope.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, for those of you that might not be aware, we're very careful when we take a name from at IETF.org. We ask the ISG to approve it so that we are not taking away an acronym for a future working group. Cindy, would you like to walk us through what's happening with the IAB website?
So, excuse me, the IAB website has gone to the IAB for final review so that we can finish this up. During the review, 2 issues came up that need to be addressed before you can proceed. One of them is less urgent, and I seem to be the only person who noticed it because I'm running an old version of Safari, and that's that in the header image, there's supposed to be a gradient overlay to make text easier to see, and that's not showing up properly in older versions of Safari. The more urgent issue is that the sidebar menus are showing the wrong level of page. They're showing the level you're currently at instead of one deeper, which is fine if you're on a browser, but if you're on mobile, that means that you can't actually get to those lower level pages. So I think Nick's the one who's going to be taking a look at those, and then once that's addressed, we will be getting the final okay to do this, get this complete.
Is it, do you think it's likely that we'll be deploying the new website before this IETF meeting, or will it roll in shortly after?
I think it depends on how long it takes to fix the menu issue. If it gets too close to the meeting, just for my own sanity, I would say do it after the meeting, but we'll see.
All right. Anybody have any questions about the IAB website? Nick and I are going to talk a little bit about an experiment that we have gone through to move the IRTF website to be served entirely from cloud services rather than from the current location that the service is being provided. Nick, would you give a real quick overview of how we're serving it, how we're planning to serve it anyhow?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So basically, the source files are stored in GitHub, and then when there's a deployment, it's pushed to Azure blob storage, and then it's served as basically a CDN from there. So it allows us to have like a very large file because there's video files basically, and yeah, we can have both static files and video files on the blob storage as CDN.
Yeah, the fun challenges here were that Colin had an established workflow that involved essentially making a release at the GitHub repository, then pushing files from his local copy over FTP to the service that we've been using. That last step is replaced with a GitHub action that does a build. You know, it's part of the back end of once the release is ready to go and looks good in staging, because we are providing a staging area that he didn't have before. a GitHub action actually pushes it out to the cloud service. Some of the things that we discovered while we were doing this were surprising. The site had grown organically over a very long time, several decades, and there were policies that were strewn between htaccess files and the primary Apache configuration file, decisions that had been made long ago, things like steering all traffic to the Apex domain instead of using www.IRTF.org. Using cloud services, putting a service at the Apex domain is awkward. Most cloud services work by having you CNAME one of your names to one of their names, and then they have infrastructure behind that name that provides the service. CNAMing an Apex name doesn't work for reasons that we all know. Anybody hasn't encountered it, you need to have things like SOA and NS and other records up at the Apex. So to use cloud services as they've been implemented, putting a web service at the Apex is complex and expensive. So we are going to be changing that redirection back to www.irtf.org. One of the things that we discovered that we're going to wait until this deployment to fix. In the current deployment, if you walk up to the web service with an HTTPS URL for www.irtf.org, you get redirected to HTTP at irtf.org and then redirected back to HTTPS at irtf.org. It's a convoluted set of configurations through, again, the primary Apache configuration and then the htaccess in the deployment. But this gets straightened out when with the new deployment, and we won't have that misdirection through the just plain HTTP transport. All right. Anybody have any questions about that one?
So my understanding is that up to now, the IRTF site has been essentially all static-y files generated on a laptop and then, as you said, FTP'd over to the site. And the change you're making is that now it goes directly from GitHub to this static blob storage in the cloud provider.
That's correct.
Okay. Cool. I love static websites because they don't break usually when you archive them
as easily till the browsers change the rules. All right, Greg, would you like to talk about where we are with dashboarding?
Okay. Well, the description in the agenda covers it pretty well. I'm happy to answer any questions, but in case you haven't read it, the summary is getting a dashboard of sort of some high-level current stats about work underway in the IETF is something that will be helpful generally, but also it's something that the ISG requested, and thanks to Robert and Nick and other folks, we think we'll have a live demo by IETF 118.
Yeah, Michael, I see your embedded question. We don't have anything that we want to expose before the ISG signs off on it. So you can look at just the examples at Redash, the Redash project. The results are using basic outputs from that. So the concept behind this is that we have a purpose dashboarding infrastructure that feeds off APIs from different systems, the data tracker and the mail archive, and will present ongoing views based on request. We're building this first one out for the ISG, as the notes say, and we've got a second one slated that would be just a standing year-to-date kind of dashboard for the community that would also be useful for feeding into the annual report.
And by the way, Greg, do you intend to schedule another demonstration or show up with the ISG in the coming telechats?
Coming telechat, no. I think we have another check-in next week, and once we get through that, then we'll know exactly when we want to do the ISG presentation. My guess is, given timing, it's going to be something like we did at 117, where it'll be during the meeting itself.
Okay.
All right. Next topic is a big one. We've been working very hard since the last IETF started just before the last IETF. Sorry, did I hear a comment? Okay. On a significant change to the way that RFCs are modeled in the data tracker database. To date, RFCs have been a pseudo revision of a document called draft. So when you were looking at a draft in the data tracker and you moved on to the RFC, it was if you were looking at, you know, some unnumbered magic version called RFC. The plumbing to allow that to happen was complex. It necessarily caused N+1 queries and a lot of page views. We stripped that out by making RFCs their own document type of type RFC, with leveraging the related document plumbing to say this RFC came from that draft. So the draft became this RFC. There is a deployment of the current working feature branch at dtrc.dev.ietf.org. I encourage people to go play with it. We've done quite a bit of work with the front search page. Pay close attention in particular to the history tabs of a draft that has become RFC and at an RFC. Navigate around, see if you can find any problems. We're going to be asking that people exercise their routines. And this is a sandbox instance. Any change you make there is isolated to that instance, and it will not send email to anyone. So feel free to do crazy things in it. Until and through IETF 118, and we will merge and deploy just after 118. We'd hoped to do that deploy by now, but lots and lots and lots of difficult edge cases to work through. We still have one that is open, and that is rebuilding the references relationships. So when you're looking at an RFC, you can see what the RFC actually references and what referenced the RFC, and rebuilding the relationships for the last draft revision before it became that RFC, so that you can see what that revision referenced, which is quite often different from what the RFC referenced, as references get updated during the RPC handling process. The next thing that we will do after we deploy, one major feature before I move on to that. We're now explicitly modeling subseries as document types. So there is a document type of BCP, STD, and FYI. If you're looking at an RFC that is also an STD, as part of an STD, part of an BCP, the metadata on the RFC page will tell you so. And you can get a link to look at a BCP that has multiple things in it and see what the entire constituency of that BCP is. One of the other things that we're working on is tuning the wording and the history that are added to the BCP objects and to the RFC objects when we ingest the subseries from the RFC editor index, to make it clearer that these things have been part of a BCP or an STD for a very long time, but the data tracker is just now learning about it. So, like many things, we don't have good data to go back and synthesize the data from when things actually became part of a BCP or part of an STD. Yes, there's a 80% of those things out there just have one RFC in the BCP, and the publication date of the RFC should match when it was joined in with the BCP, but that other 20% is rough, and some of those dates are only in date form, not date time form, and some of those dates are just flat missing. There's a page at the RFC editor. You can look at the constituency for when things were added to the BCP, and it notes where there are issues. So a data cleanup effort for another time. So the final thing that I was going to mention is right after that deploy, we have another big refactor that we talked about last month that's sitting there waiting, ready to go, that changes all of the models that pointed directly into the Django user table, where they should have been pointing into the data tracker person table instead. This simplifies a lot of problems that we were having with conflicting logic in the community application, and that's the thing that lets you subscribe to documents, and in particular in the NomCom application, where feedback was hanging off of a Django user instead of off of a data tracker person. So that will be another disruptive thing that comes in during the slightly quieter time post IETF 118. Any questions about making RFCs distinct documents? Just a quick note that we are starting discussions with ZX Security as the contractor that we put a multi-year contract in place for doing security reviews of our applications. They're going to be looking at the dibietf.org service, both the as deployed and doing a code review. We're expecting them to do this in the November-December timeframe, and we are working through the agreements to get work started on that in that timeframe. A quick note on our plans for moving away from TastyPie, the V1 API for the data tracker. We had spent quite some time exploring whether or not we would replace TastyPie with a completely different paradigm called the, my brain's going to fail to give me the word, GraphQL, there we go. GraphQL as the mechanism that we would expose the database to general purpose other people's applications. Several of the things that we learned at the 117 code sprint indicated that this wasn't necessarily the greatest idea. It's possible, but very, very hard to use GraphQL to create a generic API for random users' use without creating a thing where a single query can cause you to do very, very large amount of work. It's also not the clearest from documenting the API point of view. We had a champion of open API at the sprint that was explaining to us that we would probably be better off with something that was closer to perhaps the Django REST framework, which is where much of the kinds of things that TastyPie tried to do moved. So we'll be staring at that a little bit more closely over the next little bit. We do intend to explore GraphQL for internal APIs. So when we have hard access control and we know what queries are, what the shape of the queries that are coming are going to be. Any questions about that? All right, moving on quickly, I will touch on a service that broke and went 3 months before anybody noticed that it broke. We have a very few number of lists still where the actual list lives somewhere else, but we want to keep a copy in Mail Archive just as documentation of the work that the working group's been doing. The one that's most active right now is the HTTP BIS working groups list, which is at W3. And we had a email address subscribed to that the plumbing for receiving messages from that subscription broke. And as I said, it took 3 months for anybody to notice or complain. We've restored it. It broke because we made a mistake. We dropped a domain name when we were moving things into Cloudflare because we couldn't remember or find anything that was using that domain name, and it turned out to be buried in the deep mailman archiving configuration. Right now, we're using an @IETF.org name that is, again, just completely opaque as a temporary basis. It's got a bunch of hashed characters in it. We will move to a different subdomain later after we bike shed, making something that will be more self-documenting, so somebody that stumbles across it in the future knows where to look for how it's being used. Anybody have any questions about this? All right, Dave, if you wanted to introduce the tool that you were working on.
Yeah, sure. So let me start off with just saying that we've got lots of tooling around Markdown, and of course, Markdown is not expressive enough by itself, and so it had to be like YAML augmented with Cramdown, and so you don't have a pure Markdown file. But other communities, such as the Linux kernel community, use RST, the restructured text format, rather than Markdown for normal documentation. So we get a bunch of authors and even source files that people want to use that are written in RST rather than Markdown. And in particular, the BPF working group wanted to take RST files that's in the Linux kernel repository and use those to generate internet drafts that incorporate those RST files without having to do a conversion. And of course, you know, in previous IETFs, we went through all the legal stuff, and all the legal stuff has been worked out, so there's no problem with that. And so I had written a tool that converts from RST into the the XML to RFC v3, just like we have tools that do that for Markdown and other formats. And so now the BPF working group drafts, or the ones that are up for adoption in there, are in fact written in RST with this tool to do the conversion. But of course, there's nothing in the tool that's BPF specific. It's just the generic tool. Right now, the tool is sitting in my GitHub organization, meaning it's just under github.com/dthaler. And since it is not BPF specific, my thought is that it would be great to put it into the the IETF.org site alongside, say, the Markdown stuff. There might be some things you can do in RST, not in Markdown, and vice versa, and that's okay, because at the end of the day, what you're getting is you're getting the XML, which is what actually gets submitted. And of course, there's a couple places, and so I'm raising this for visibility and for feedback, and then I have one question. There's the wiki that just talks about and thank you, Jay, for the answers. I'm not going to ask those questions since you've just answered those. I appreciate that. There's the drafting other markup languages, which is just pure text instructions of how to do things, and I can imagine another page being in parallel to that. Then there's the actual submission site. The actual submission site accepts XML, it accepts Markdown, and does the conversion on the back end, right? And so part of my question is, could you, I'd like to follow up with somebody offline. I don't have to have the answer right now. Follow up with somebody offline that says, what happens when you do try to submit a Markdown into the submission thing? Is that extensible? So that's one question. And the other question I have is there any problem with it being under my GitHub organization? Do I need to move it under some tools GitHub organization? If so, I'm happy to do that. You know, right now it's MIT licensed, but I'm happy to do whatever if it means it would be usable by more people. So those are my questions, but at least want to get visibility and get recommendations on next steps.
All right. So to tune some of what you've observed, the submission tool at the data tracker does not accept Markdown. It accepts XML. We have tooling at Author Tools that will do Markdown to XML conversion for people, and they can then carry that XML along.
Sorry, that's the one that I meant. Authors.ietf.org.
Yep. Yeah. Author tools is where something would actually happen, right? Authors is a wiki that just talks about things. So,
Okay. Yeah, sorry.
Cramdown RSC is not, the source for that is not in the IETF-TOOLS organization. It is in Cabo's GitHub repository. So we have, examples of tools that the community uses that people are still hosting out of their own repo. As usage increases, we have conversations about whether or not we take on maintenance of things, right? And that is a separate conversation from whether or not we hold the tool in our IETF org organization. There are a few tools in the IETF.org organization already that we are housing because the community is using them, but the tools team doesn't really work on them. It's the there is a lead maintainer that's established for those that is managing the contributions to them. So this may evolve into something more streamlined as we go forward. But the punchline in my attempt to answer your questions is that we just talk through about what makes sense. Jay, just do feel free to just jump in.
Yeah, thanks. So, Dave, provided that you keep the tools catalog table up to date, then the tool, as far as we're concerned, still exists. It's when we sort of lose track with it, when it decays, that we start to undo things. To get it into author tools, you just need to have a conversation with Kasara, and he needs to check that it works and that it's stable and that he can build it into the tools and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty liberal about that. Just need to make sure that it isn't going to cause him work in order to have that there. MIT license is perfect, no issue at all. If you want documentation specific to that tool, then we would suggest that that's in the GitHub repo for that, and we point to it from authors, rather than actually having the stuff in authors. And then finally, there's a specific page in authors for drafting it in unusual markup languages, which RST is almost certainly one of them. So you can just add an entire section to that as you feel fit via a PR. And I would just generally check the PR to make sure it's not nonsense, rather than actually attempt to get into the technical details of it. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Do you have anything else that you'd like to talk about?
I don't think so. I'm taking my next steps is to follow pull requests like Jay mentioned. But now you've all got a little bit of introduction if you weren't aware of this before. So thanks.
Yep. Do be aware that Kasara is currently on an extended PTO. He will return at the end of the month, so we'll be slow to respond to any questions that are aimed directly at him.
I figure we can talk about it at IETF if necessary. So.
Yep, and he should be there. So. All right, we're about to move into the FYI section of the meeting. Most of this is usually meant to be taken as read, unless people have questions to bring up. But we've got a few things that we should highlight this time around. Jay, if you'd like to talk about the email processing services RFP.
Yeah, so we have two big RFPs out. We have now contracted for the email processing services RFP with Serious Open Source, and we have Mark, Jesse, and Thomas from there. They currently already do some work for us on Postgres stuff and have been very helpful. But over to you to introduce yourselves. You've got to use the microphone though.
Oops. I'm still learning the tool.
Yep, you're good.
I had a little bit of a challenge coming in here earlier, but can everyone hear me now?
Yep.
I'm Mark Taylor. I'm from Sirius. I'm our CEO. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me to the community event. And I'm joined with a couple of my colleagues here. Jesse Portnoy is one of our senior engineers and a DevOps engineer who'll be taking part in the Mailman project, and Thomas has been working with you for quite some time in the Postgres project. I don't know if you need anything else. Great to be here. Happy to see everyone. Happy to answer any questions, but there we are. Looking forward to getting started. We're not joined by one of my other colleagues, Steve, who is one of the Mailman core team, who will be our lead engineer in the project. Very much looking forward to it, and we hope we're going to do an excellent job for you. That's pretty much it, Jay.
Great. Thank you, Mark.
So, Jay, would you mind summarizing in 1 or 2 sentences the mission of Sirius Software for the IETF?
I'll leave that to Mark.
Sure. Well, we've been around for a while, and I think our mission could be handily summarized by saying we're committed to seeing open standards, open source, and open data everywhere. We've been around since 1998. We're not exclusive with it, but we do specialize in open source software. And we have been aware, of course, of the IETF for as long as our existence, and we very much support your mission as well.
And for us, Sirius will be taking over management of the entire mail, everything mail related, just about. So mailman and mail delivery, anti-spam, whitelisting services, all of that kind of stuff. Everything as a specialist provider around those.
You're right into my mind about Mailman 3, which was basically the core of my question. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so the RFP has the details in it, it's public, so there will be a transfer over to Mailman 3 that Sirius will be running for us. We do, of course, have the issue of post-confirm and rewriting post-confirm. And I think the discussion that's taken place between Sirius and Robert is to replace that as 1 or 2 milters built into postfix, I think. So that's the general plan around that. Okay, and then...
Sorry, okay. I was just going to emphasize and confirm what Jay is saying. We've been around Mailman for a very long time, including into the core team. We understand there's some development work which we'd be happy to get involved in and support your end. And we think we probably have a pretty good chance of getting any changes built back into the underlying open source project as well.
Okay, thank you, Mark and Jay.
Thank you. And then the next one is the infrastructure services RFP. Now we're still negotiating with the preferred bidder on there. As soon as the contract is signed, we will let you know who they are, and of course they'll be introduced at one of these meetings. But we're not quite there yet. Should be just about there very shortly. So that's it for the things I just wanted to update on. Thanks.
All right, so the rest of this, again, I'm going to say to take as read. If anybody has any questions about any of the services that we're talking about in the rest of this FYI section, skim, feel free to ask. If anybody has anything that they want to add to what's already in the notes with a verbal description, just feel free to jump in, point to the section. I guess it is worth making sure that everyone sees the strategic change in direction for Yang Catalog. We will be moving ongoing support of that back into the tools team.
On this one, right? The statement of work runs until end of December, if not mistaken.
Yes.
So we got commitment from Pantheon to do the transfer. I mean, Joe knows the thing, right? He wrote it to the tools team.
Yeah, I just reached out to them after Jay's note to see how we can do that transfer of information, when we can do it, whom to work with. Obviously, they're probably asleep, haven't got an answer, but yeah, we need to figure that out. They are still doing maintenance. They did a commit just this past week, but we need to get the knowledge of the structure and the deployment and the maintenance, because what I wrote is not where it's at right now.
Yeah, I mean, they work on it, yeah.
There is a documentation section of the project that they just need to ensure is up to date. I had pressed early on as they were building the deployment that it was complete. At least to make sure that there hasn't been any drift.
And do we have already, sorry if I'm being close to being nasty here, who will be handling this in the tools team?
There are only 4 of us, so the
all of them.
It will be us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for everyone else's benefit, we've looked at this service, and it is a fairly stable service. Not a lot of development is needed on it, and it's relatively low usage. We're not entirely sure of the usage level, and so we don't think we need what is effectively a full-time person on it anymore. So we're going to, and it runs on AWS already. It's unusual for much of our architecture. So we're going to just take over the management of it, understand its usage a little bit better, and then consider whether certain parts of it can be absorbed into our other tool suite as a sort of, as a business as usual type thing rather than a specific standalone site. We haven't made that decision. And then, possibly then wind down that site or transfer things over at some point in the future. So generally, we're expecting relatively low level of effort required to keep it going. If we do have to do something specific and large to it, then that will need to be a separately funded project, and we may well then go external for that rather than doing that internally. It depends on how things fit. So that's the plan for it.
All right. I believe this takes us into open discussion and any other business. If anybody has anything that they would like to discuss. Going once. Warren, please just jump in.
Thank you. So I actually just submitted a GitHub issue and figured I would try and talk through it to provide some background. I've had this as a to-do item on my to-do list for a long time, or action item list for a long time. Sometimes we end up with authors who pass away during the creation of a document, and it can be distressing for the family to continue receiving email. So, for example, the data tracker, there's a new version posted, etc. What would be nice is if we could have some sort of feature so the data tracker would stop sending email to specific addresses. And hopefully this feature will be used very seldom. So, it should require exceptional handling to enable. I don't really think that we care how it's implemented. We're thinking, something where the data tracker tries to send the email and it just gets null routed or something. But
there's been a little bit of team discussion and even community discussion about this already. The issue that you entered is basically a duplicate of another issue where there's some detail that's been added. I will tie them together after the call. It is on the roadmap to provide this better tooling.
Okay, awesome. I thought that there was a ticket somewhere, but I couldn't find it, so I just opened another one.
And let me add that we also have on the roadmap an in memoriam section being added to data tracker as well, so that we can remember people who pass on as well.
All right. The last thing that I have to add is that while we currently have a November meeting scheduled, it is immediately after IETF, the IETF meeting itself. Most people will still be traveling. Typically, we cancel the meeting that's immediately after one of these IETF meetings. The plan, I will cancel this. The plan will be that our next tools team call will be in early December. If it turns out there's a reason to get everyone together before then, I will schedule a session later in November. We will, at least we are planning also to have a section of the code sprint be a little bit more of an information sharing session, just talking through architecture, some of these architectural changes, some of the ways that we're talking about using APIs that will make sure that we have a bridge that remote participants can participate in, and we'll try to find a time that works for as much of the globe as we can. As everyone knows, finding something that would allow remote participation for everyone at a convenient time is not feasible. But we'll have details about the timing of that up in a week or so, a couple of weeks before we get to the meeting. Our meeting is rolling up on us very, very quickly. So,
may I assume it will be recorded? This explanation, like the
sure.
workshop you did one
If it comes together well, then we will record it. Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Unless somebody else has something else, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to get together. This opportunity to get feedback and direction is incredibly valuable, and I appreciate you giving your time to help us do the right thing. And we will see many of you at this next IETF meeting. All right. Bye-bye.